If you've got a question, the voices of resin are here. Oh, PlastChicks.
PlastChicks is an SPE sponsored podcast. Happy Thursday.
Happy COVID Thursday, everyone.
Happy COVID Thursday. We are doing a special episode where Mercedes is COVID riddled. She escaped it for all the years, and now here she is.
A couple of years, never had it. Yeah. And yeah, now where I'm not going into the plant every day anymore. Finally got it somehow. So frequent listeners will notice that my voice sounds a little bit different than usual. And my background here, if you're watching the video, is my child's bedroom. So
perfect.
Having a lot of fun over here by myself.
You know what? I think really, is there any better way to celebrate COVID than recording a podcast? It feels very on brand with COVID.
It feels very on brand. Yeah. Well, I am the stricken Mercedes Landazuri.
And I am Lynzie Nebel.
And with our powers combined, we are PlastChicks. The voices of resin.
Yep. And COVID. So resin and COVID today.
Tonight, COVID. Yeah.
A little extra dash for you. So you can listen to our lovely COVID-free selves every
first Friday of every month.
Friday. I don't know why I want to say every Friday. Not every Friday.
The brain fog. I have the brain fog this episode. Yeah, I guess you're allowed to have some brain fog too. Yeah.
Right. We'll share it. And you can catch our podcast on all the podcast supplied areas like Spotify,
Apple Podcasts, all of them.
Once you're done streaming Taylor Swift's Midnights in sadness of not getting any tickets, then switch over to an episode of PlastChicks to cheer you up. Yeah, that's what I do.
Yep. I didn't get any tickets either.
Yeah, no one did. Just the devils themselves.
Yeah.
And you can catch us on social media. This podcast goes up on YouTube, and then also if you catch us on Instagram and Twitter at PlastChicks. Remember, there's no I between the Plast and Chicks. And one day, a TikTok. We say it every episode, and I think we're going on about a year of saying it without actually doing a TikTok. We have the handle reserved.
We're very busy.
Whenever
hands full, yeah.
Exactly. Whenever TikTok becomes incredibly uncool, we will start our TikTok channel. I think that's it. So enough of our brain foggy chaos. We have a kind of extra special guest today because this guest is also doing something in conjunction with SPE that we will get into in a minute. So today we have Neil Thompson. And I think my favorite title, he has like a million titles, but my favorite one is Teacher of Geeks. So welcome, Neil.
Thank you.
Welcome, Neil. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
So, Neil, you are the owner of Teach the Geek to Speak, which I have to vouch for is a really, number one, just the title is outstanding. There is no better title for that. But number two, it is a really great program. Again, I'm really firing on all two cylinders tonight.
Well, let's let him tell us about it.
Yeah. So tell us about Teach the Geek.
Sure. Well, Teach the Geek started with my own struggles giving presentations in front of people. It was my second job out of school. I was working as a product development engineer at a medical device company. And a few months into the job, my boss told me I was going to be a project lead. I didn't know what a project lead was, so I asked him, and apparently the company was too cheap to hire project managers, so they pushed that responsibility onto the product development engineers, one of which was giving presentations on a monthly basis in front of senior management. So we're talking the CEO, CTO, CMO, C, fill in the blank O, all the C's. And they were all in this room, and all the engineers pretty much had to get up in front of them and tell them about their projects and any status updates. And those first few presentations that I gave were absolutely horrendous. I did not know it was possible to sweat that profusely from one's body, but there it was. But I eventually got the message that this is something that I needed to get better at because my project was canceled, and this was this is about 15 years ago now, and I still believe that perhaps if I was just better at relaying the information to these people in a way that they could really take it and understand, maybe I could have saved the project. I suppose we'll never know. But that at least was the wake-up call that I needed to get better at just being better and more prepared, more proficient at giving presentations in front of others, especially non-technical audiences, when I had to give these technical type presentations. And I basically turned everything that I learned in my journey to become better at giving presentations into an online course. And I called it Teach the Geek to Speak. But then I decided maybe a couple of years after I started the course that I wanted to offer a membership as well, as opposed to just a one-off course. So that's where the whole membership idea came from, and what I've been doing with SPE for the last few months, which is in addition to having access to the course, you also get an online portal where people could talk to each other, ask questions, and then there's these monthly calls.
Yeah, and
and you know, it's such a common thing, right? Where people are, you know, as we move up in our roles, we reach our own level of incompetence, right? So this is something to get past that hurdle, right? So an engineer, regardless of maybe someone who comes from this background of, okay, I'm focused on this task, I'm focused on solving this problem, but they get better and better at it. And now it's their job to present their work to others, and where they maybe never received any formal training for it at all. So it's a fantastic program that you have. So can you tell us a little bit more about your specific background in engineering? How did you come to it? Do you know? So Lynzie, for example, always knew, you know, she wanted to be an engineer. I had no idea I wanted to get into this industry. What about you?
Oh no, I became an engineer because my father told me to. And I used to lie about that reason because I was embarrassed by it. Because like most people are like Lynzie, they always knew they wanted to be an engineer. Maybe they played with Legos as a child. Maybe they were in robotics club when they were in school. There was no robotics club at my high school, and I don't even remember playing with Legos all that much. I became an engineer because my father said become an engineer, and I didn't really have any ideas other than that, so I just said engineering school it is. So that's what I did.
I love it.
And which school did you go to?
I've been to a few. I went to a few. So I'm originally from Canada. So the first school I went to was the University of Toronto. And then I went to Clemson University to do a master's because my father said do a master's. And then I went to Columbia University to do a PhD, but I dropped out after a year. By that time, I was about 25 years old. I had done what he told me to do up until that time, but now I had to live now I decided I was going to live for myself and do what I wanted to do, because ultimately you have to live for what you want as opposed to what other people want for you.
Absolutely. I totally rebelled against my dad by not getting a PhD also. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
That's fantastic. So, and then you became a product development engineer. And so what types of projects did you get to work on?
Well, the companies I worked with were mostly orthopedic implants, more specifically spinal implants, and more specifically than that, orthobiologics. When I talk about orthobiologics, most people don't know what that is, but essentially spinal implants can be made out of a number of materials, metals or ceramics, but they can also be made out of human cadaver bone. So I used to work in the groups that made or designed these spinal implants out of human cadaver bone.
What a fun time. Was your house always the best house for Halloween?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be if I just came from the tissue bank. If you've ever been to a tissue bank, it's a smell that you'll never forget, and it gets into your clothes. And then you go home, and then now your whole house smells like it. It stays in your nostrils. It's a nasty smell. It's because what we're getting is people's donated organs and their donated bones, and when you cut into them, you get all the fat that comes off of them. Especially if you've got the obese people, there's a whole lot of fat you gotta get rid of. It's not pleasant.
Oh man, and I thought burning PVC smelled bad.
I was gonna say
there.
I've done like medical implants, but they've all been plastic, so I'm just gonna be very, very grateful for that.
I think you should.
God bless plastic.
So were you happy with the field that you ended up going into?
That's what I was gonna ask. Did you find happiness within engineering, or was it at just some point you're like, all right, I've tried this for long enough?
Luckily, it worked out pretty well, but it certainly could have gone the other way because I was just doing what someone else told me to do. And now when I talk to people about going into fields, I'm very adamant about telling them this needs to be something that you're willing to do and something that you're willing to work at, because if not, then you'll leave.
Yeah, I agree. I know there's even like freshman class, I don't know what the dropout rate was in your classes, but I know we had probably a class of originally maybe 40, and about 5 people dropped within the first semester. Just their parents said, you should go to school for engineering. They got there and they're like, nope, just did a big old 180 and bowed out of there. I don't know what happened to any of them, so I don't know where they went. So, your talk, so Teach the Geek is really, as we mentioned, like handling one of the major flaws, I'm going to say it with air quotes for those listening audio only, of most engineers. If you go stereotypical engineer, they're not going to be a good speaker. And, I think most engineers, again, going stereotypical, are going to be looking at themselves to develop in, whatever their field is, looking at taking courses on, learning more about injection molding because it's the bestest molding, learning about materials, picking up stuff like that, learning from
knowledge,
all the technical knowledge. What do you have to come to that aha moment like you had to really start realizing that some of these soft skills are going to be just as beneficial as some of these technical, if not more?
Do you have to fail first? Do you have to fall on your face first, or can you come to that realization without having a whole face in the pie moment?
Well, I would hope so, but it certainly, I think, the case where many people come to that conclusion, kind of like I did. Something had to happen for them to finally see the benefit of it. One of which could very well be seeing somebody you think shouldn't have gotten the promotion and pay raise that you thought you deserved, get it because they were just more networked than you. They're better presenting than you. They're better at just connecting with others and building relationships than you were. And you thought you could just rely on your technical skills and do your job and keep your head down and everything would work out. But that's just not the case in most instances.
Yeah, you got to be smart and pretty. pretty and soft skills.
I mean, it goes to show you that it is that there are, I think, as engineers, sometimes we tend to think in black and white, right? And check the boxes, and really those intangibles are things that aren't really in the forefront of our minds, right? But you mentioned, that in your job, when you were working as an engineer and as the project lead, that you were sometimes asked to present to non-engineers and non-technical people, and having to convey this technical data to non-technical people. Why do you think so many engineers struggle doing that when we all start from the same place, right? We all start with the same, basic language.
Yeah, I think one of the big issues we have is there's a lot of technical jargon that we may use amongst each other, and we don't really give all that much credence to perhaps we shouldn't use all that technical jargon when talking to non-technical audiences because they're not going to understand what you're talking about. I mentioned that the first 2 presentations I gave were horrendous. One of the reasons they were so bad is because after the presentations, I would get questions that I thought I had answered during the presentation. But because I didn't put things in a way that people could understand, I was already a sweaty mess. Now I'm really a sweaty mess trying to answer all these questions. It's just we still, I don't think we put enough thought into putting the information, this technical information, into a way that people that don't have our level of expertise would understand. It's such a shame, especially if we were just to think about it for a minute. mean, we weren't always engineers. What we know, we didn't always know. So we really should have that grace and empathy for the people that are in the audience that need to listen to what we have to say, to think, well, they don't know what we know now. So what can we do to make it so that they can really take in what we have to say?
I love that, Neil, that coming at it from a place of empathy and grace, rather than here's what I know and here's how I'm going to impress you with my knowledge. It's really like trying to empathize with your listeners. That's such a great point.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at that the same way. Like, is there a litmus test or like a quick test you have? You know, if you get done with the presentation and you have, say, 5 questions that you thought you already answered, is there a certain number of those questions that you get that you're like, okay, I'm really outside the box, or you can blame that other person?
Asking for a friend.
Well, I mean,
general question.
Based on the questions I used to have to give, I mean, if you're getting the question, what does orthobiologics mean? That might be a problem. But yeah, oftentimes it just comes down to words that you think are commonplace because you use them all the time, but this audience doesn't necessarily know those words. When I was, especially that second job, the orthobiologics group was a new group within the company. I was maybe the 3rd employee that was hired into that group. So no one else in the company knew anything really about orthobiologics. So it was even more important for me to use terms that these people could understand. And I didn't get it at first.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, here I have a question. So I have a question. This podcast is basically all us asking questions.
But go ahead, try it out.
I have a question. Great, Mercedes, good job. So when I feel like a lot of times after a presentation, it can be difficult to get constructive feedback. What are some good questions to maybe solicit better feedback? Because if people will oftentimes tell you, especially sometimes if they have no idea what you're talking about, say, oh yeah, no, you sounded great, you knew what you were talking about, great, right? and you do, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that you did a great job presenting the material to an audience who didn't understand it, right? So what are some kind of like barometer questions? What are some questions that we can ask ourselves to figure out, okay, how did my audience receive this, and what is it that I need to be focused on?
Well, typically, if you're preparing a presentation, you want there to be some sort of call to action. When I was giving presentations in front of the senior management, the call to action often was, we need more resources, maybe we need more time, we need some, there's something that is needed. And I tried my best to make that known throughout the presentation. So if you're soliciting feedback, at least in that instance, you could very well ask somebody in the audience, what do you think the call to action was? And if they can't answer it, well, maybe you didn't do the best job of conveying the information. Maybe you weren't interesting enough with how you presented the information for them to pay attention. And then you can go back to the drawing board and think to yourself, well, what do I need to do to get better at making sure that everyone, or at least the majority of people, or the decision makers, the really important people, know what that call to action actually was.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, I think that's good. I know, like I mentioned earlier, I've been participating in the membership in Teach the Geek, and I had a presentation a couple months ago, and I had the opportunity to go through it with Neil, and at the end he goes, so what's your call to action? And I was like, huh, good point. This just kind of leaves it all out there, and I walk away. And I think that call to action made all the difference in the impact of it, because, it's all, here's all the content, and, we all get content all day long. I have a million things of content I can content away, but once I have an actual list of something to actively do as the listener, like it's a game changer. So I thought it was very helpful.
Very helpful.
So you're you're in the business of speakers. We got to know, what are some of the worst speeches you've ever seen or worst speakers?
Without naming names.
You don't have to name names, but if you want to name names and we know them, even better.
No, you definitely wouldn't know any of these people. Though the worst presentations I've ever seen have been at conferences, actually. So when I used to work as an engineer, I used to have to go to these conferences, and a lot of them that I went to were very academic based. So a lot of the people who were giving presentations were grad students, postdocs, and professors. And man, if you were sleepy going into one of these conference talks, you better bring some coffee, because it's going to be a problem staying awake, especially if you sit down. The issue that you have with these presenters, unfortunately, is that if you're in academia, doing a great job at giving a presentation isn't a metric that you're judged on when it comes to moving up, becoming a tenured professor, or moving to a postdoc from a grad student position. It's really the fact that you actually just gave the talk at that conference. So the big problem is that a lot of times they'd have a whole lot of text on the slides and they just read the slides. The problem with that is it's really difficult to engage an audience when you're not looking at them, because you're looking at the slides, because you have to read them. And another reason why it's a bad idea is the people that are actually in the audience, they're going to read the slides too. And it's really difficult to read slides and listen to somebody at the same time. So that's another reason why it would be rather boring, just reading slides, and you're already tired because this person is droning on over something, and it's a problem. And a way to get around it is to just minimize the amount of text on the slide, so the presenter then doesn't have that ability to read the slide. They have to know their material well enough to say it off, from their mind, and then also they can look at the audience. And not only that, but it eliminates the ability for the audience to read your slides. Now they either have to listen to you or they ignore you, and hopefully you do a good enough of a job that they actually listen to what you have to say.
And that kind of reminds me, what you're saying earlier, Mercedes, like, as engineers, we're just checking that box. And if you're in academia and you're looking to, you're just looking to check that box, like, yep, I gave that presentation, I did this study, now move me on.
Right. Yeah, I remember actually seeing Erin Kinney present once. The first time I saw her present, and I went up to her afterwards. I'd known her for a year and a half, maybe at that point. And I went up to her and I was like, your presentation was incredible. The way you presented, she said, it's something that I really worked on a lot. And she has her own business, right? So she had to get really good at that. And she took classes, and it was something that she worked on, and it was night and day, regardless of anybody else who was up on that stage that day's experience or knowledge or skill set. She really stood out because she had worked on this specific skill set of presenting. It's just so necessary. We all need to do it.
And so that's one of the things, like, learning how to speak in front of people, seems like such a very basic skill. And it almost seems like something that, like, oh yeah, like, I know how to speak in front of people, but it's really not as much of a talent as it is a skill. And so, it comes down to fairly simple principles, when you list it all out or look at it on that perspective. But then when some people get up on stage or, like, actually go to do these presentations, it all goes out the window. Like, why do you think that is? Especially, we're not talking about, like, just your everyday dummy. We're talking about some really intelligent people not being able to hold all these really smart things along with the ability to talk.
What's behind that?
I think a big issue is making sure that you convey all the information that you want to convey. And I think people can sometimes get tripped up if perhaps they don't present the information in the way that they had thought they were going to. And if that happens, then they get kind of discombobulated, and then the whole presentation goes to hell in a handbasket pretty quickly. And I think also another issue that people have with presentations is just a fear of them looking incompetent in front of people, especially people that they need to impress, or decision makers. For instance, the presentations I used to have to give, I really didn't want the CEO to think that I was a bozo. I really that's why I got the message that getting better at giving these presentations was something that I should do, and it's made all the difference, really. If you once you at least overcome that fear of being or looking incompetent, it makes all the difference. And another thing, when it comes to that, other people, I mean, everyone feels that way. So even if you're in the audience and or you're the presenter and you're feeling this way, just know that people in the audience have felt this way too. So you're kind of in this together, especially if you think of it as the people in the audience actually want to see you do well. They're not really rooting against you, because at some point they may be the ones giving the presentation, and they certainly don't want the audience rooting against them. So if you just visualize yourself actually giving these presentations and seeing things go well, and not telling yourself that you're a bad presenter, just tell yourself that you're someone who's improving, because we manifest our thoughts pretty much. And if you think that if you think you suck, you will. But if you think you're improving, you will.
I like that.
And everybody has their horror stories. I remember Barb, when she gave her presentation at Antec, I think that it was part of her dissertation, actually, when she was getting her PhD, and asked her how she did afterwards. She said, I gave it with my fly down the whole time. I found out afterwards. Even the most impressive people have even more impressive horror stories of being on the podium.
Yeah, I think there's like a graph, like however smart you are, you have to fail this hard at least one speech before you can progress to the next level.
So Neil, what do you think is harder, dealing with medical device regulations or speaking in front of an audience?
Speaking in front of an audience.
Really?
Oh yeah, when it comes to regulations, you can push that off to the regulatory affairs people. That ain't my job. Figure that out.
Yeah, there's I've dealt with some medical device, stuff like that, and yeah, I think you're right. I think you could at least follow the rules for medical device stuff. With speaking in front of an audience, you're going with a dynamic situation.
And it's right there. It has to happen right now. With medical device regulations, you can just keep pushing it back and pushing it back.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I worked in product development for a reason. We get to do the fun stuff. We get to develop things and be creative, and that was fun. But regulatory and quality, they're like Dr. No. Everything's no to them.
I watched this one TikTok of a guy who his thing is he's the legal department at a big company, and every time he just answers it and he's like, hey, this is the legal department. No. And then he hangs up. Like, oh, that'd actually be kind of fun.
It's like the IT department. Turn it off and on again. Regulatory.
No, you are the issue. So I know in your, even just from your LinkedIn, you have more titles than just Teacher of Geek. Can you tell us a little bit about some of your other projects you have? Because I know there are a lot.
Sure. Well, there's patents. So I became a patent agent about 10 years ago, and actually became a patent agent because the boss that I had at the time said that I should become a patent agent. I don't know if you see a pattern here. My father told me to go into engineering. My boss told me to become a patent agent. Apparently, I don't make decisions for myself. But I did become a patent agent. And funny enough, he asked me to become one so he wouldn't have to outsource patent drafting to outside counsel. And once I became a patent agent, he outsourced everything to outside counsel. So for the number of years, I didn't have anything to patent. But then maybe a couple of years ago, I started doing some contract work with a firm here in San Diego where I live. And I work mainly on medical device patents, drafting them, and then basically arguing with the patent office to get them approved. So there's that. With a couple of former co-workers from my medical device engineering days, we do consulting with typically smaller medical device companies on their packaging. Because oftentimes these companies are thinking mostly about the product, not necessarily the packaging that it has to go into. And there's all kinds of regulations regarding the packaging as well. So I do that. And then there's also my children's book. And it's called Ask Uncle Neil, Why Is My Hair Curly? It's about my nephew asking me why his hair is the way it is. And I use science to answer the question. The goal of the book is to encourage curiosity in children so that they become the problem solvers that we want them to be, because ultimately the question askers of today are the problem solvers of tomorrow.
I love that.
Amazing. And where can we, is your book on Amazon? Where can we find your book?
Oh, sure. You can go, yeah, you can go to askuncleneilbooks.com.
AskUncleNeilBooks.com, and that's Neil, correct?
That's right.
Wonderful. And I think we're running out of time today. If people are not SPE members, or if they are, how can they find you? How can they get enrolled in one of your Teach the Geek programs?
Well, if you are an SPE member, there's the website, or there's a page on the SPE website. I can't remember what the URL is at the top of my head. But if you want to learn more about Teach the Geek, you can go to teachthegeek.com. You can always email me at hello@teachthegeek.com. And also check out my YouTube channel and podcast. So I also have a podcast and YouTube channel where I interview typically people from the technical fields on their public speaking journeys. It's been really interesting to learn about people basically getting better at giving presentations. And you mentioned Erin Keeney. She was actually a guest on my podcast. So she was very interesting to talk to. But one of the guests that I've had that was the most interesting, and I always mention her, is Christine Vartanian. She started off as a civil engineering grad, never worked as a civil engineer though. Then she went to law school, worked as a lawyer for about 4 years. Then she was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years. And now she works as a personal stylist. This is someone I never would have come in contact just in my regular travels, but just hearing that progression, civil engineering to law to mom to stylist, is just stories you don't hear every day.
Yeah, I think my favorite episode I listened to of yours was the woman who was the burnout coach, and like just how she framed it. And I think you even asked like, don't we all feel burnout? And she's like, no, it's very scientific. And she like listed it. And I was like, oh man, like she really like knew her stuff. I was like, I really enjoyed that episode.
Oh yeah, that was Kate Donovan.
Yes. Let's see. Barely remember my own
Very
name.
cool. Well, yes, I will definitely be checking out that podcast and subscribing to that as well. Checking out the YouTube.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say the URL. So for the YouTube, it's youtube.teachthegeek.com. And for the podcast, it's podcast.teachthegeek.com.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Well, Neil Thompson, thank you so much. This geek feels like she's learned quite a bit this evening.
You will be, I was going to say Teach the Geek, and then I realized that wasn't really a good pun. So I'm just going to stop here.
Well, thank you both for having me.
Thanks, Neil.
Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.